one thing you write about very well in the lesson called The First Extension is that it can be very difficult sometimes to get people to recognize that readiness work is real work. This is a very thorny problem, and you sort of get to the heart, I think, of it in a way that I haven't heard people put quite so well before, which is that um, the inherent uncertainty in readiness work is in direct opposition to the rigidity of a deadline. And I love that because a lot of times people feel like if there's a kind of up in the airness to a discussion, that means it's not being rigorous. That means it's not being serious. And so you get this kind of fake certainty as a kind of affect that people adopt, where it's like they kind of like in order to be doing serious work, they talk like everything's certain, they talk like everything's determined, and then kind of fool themselves into thinking that because they've talked that way and had those feelings, that things really are rigid and determined. But
Yeah.
so how do you get people who might be kind of, that's a normal way to think and feel, right? And so how do you get people who are in that mindset to understand that, like, you have to before you start working on something, you do have this phase of uncertainty that you just need to embrace.
The I will say, kind of give this background around that, and a lot of with so many teams that I've worked with, um, and this I think is building on top of what we discussed previously about this gap in the handoff between business and engineering. There is this tendency to take something vague, write up something vague. I'm looking at you, Safe, with your one-line features, um,
Mm.
and hand that to a team and say, "There you go take this and go and implement this for us." And then the teams are left to have to figure out, what does this mean, right? What are all of the things that you are implying in that? Because there's if you give something that is vague, not detailed and explicit, right? Then there's some vagueness to it. If it's ambiguous and that there's misunderstanding or potential misunderstandings, then it's something that's vague. And when you give something that's vague to a team, right, and then hold them to a deadline, you are literally putting them between a rock and a hard place. Because you're saying you have to deliver this thing, but it's vague, but you have to do it by this time. So now the team has to figure out, what is it that you absolutely need to have, even though you gave me this vague explanation of what it is, right? And it might not be quite as vague as I make it out to be, but in many cases it is extremely vague. The as a I want so that user story format is vague by intent, right? It's not meant to be the entire conversation and all of the details. It was never meant to be that, but teams started adopting that's okay. And because you have a lot of people from a kind of a project management approach, not of their own fault, because this is just how the industry seems to have kind of moved to it, especially with where we are today with that, are thinking that that's the right way to do it. They provide that. They don't necessarily know any better because they weren't trained on doing anything more detailed, etc. So they hand this off. But now there's a deadline that the team has to deliver it by. Well, the teams need to get that information to ultimately succeed. And that information can take time, but you have a deadline. So how do you succeed in meeting a deadline unless you build massive amounts of buffers in before the deadline is set? Right. And even then, the buffers that you build in, even those things are guesses at best. You're like, we and many times people, teams will get to this point of where they're in Riven, they're like, well, we always add X amount of buffer because we know that at least with that we tend to be able to succeed. But that's just kind of that's dealing with a symptom. It's like taking a painkiller and dealing with a symptom rather than actually dealing with the root cause and getting to the deep understanding. So this deadline says you must deliver something by this deadline, but it doesn't necessarily tell you, what it all is that you need to deliver. It doesn't give you the specificity in that. It doesn't allow you the time to necessary to get that detail. But if you end up having dependencies on, that you have no control over, you're dependent on another team building something for you, some kind of a service or something, database or something that you need to utilize, and you don't have any control over that. How can you be held responsible for meeting the deadline if you're not in control of that? If you're dependent on an external vendor or on information that needs to come from stakeholders or customers or somewhere else that you have no control over, how can you be held to meeting a deadline, when there's no real control over obtaining everything that you need in order to actually meet that deadline? And so we talk about it in the book about, we kind of throw this thing out there, say deadlines don't matter. But what we really mean is arbitrary deadlines
Right.
don't matter, because there's this tendency to use deadlines as a forcing function.
Yes.
And this is something that we've seen so many times in organizations where deadlines are used as a forcing function to just get people to start working and work harder. Right? We've got this deadline to meet, so people need to work harder. They need to sometimes spend evenings and weekends because we've got to meet this deadline. Well, is this a physical reality, or is this some fabrication of somebody who's just trying to push for something that should never have really been pushed for in the first place? And so we spend some time in the book to really help people understand and make this difference, just understand the difference between arbitrary and real deadlines. And real deadlines, they're real. And they are very, very, sorry, it's weird to say that, but in many cases, they're immutable, right? You cannot move that deadline without some ramification, some serious ramification. In some cases, it's very serious, right? There might be massive fines for missing a particular deadline because of some regulatory compliance issue that you have to address, right? And so you might end up having to, facing millions of dollars in fines for not meeting that particular deadline. And so then the question always comes in. So if we don't have a real deadline and it's arbitrary, then you're just setting the team up for failure, because what you're doing is you're providing pressure that is essentially going to cause them to cut corners and to make decisions that might not give you ultimately what you want, but then you're going to hold the team accountable for. So what you're doing is you're setting the team up for failure in that case. If you do have a real deadline, you need to work backwards from that deadline and truly understand what actually is in scope, what is absolutely critical in order to meet that deadline. And until you know that, you're not ready.